All right, we are live and we're on YouTube and Facebook, and I'm here with Lorenzo, Cohen, and Alison, Jefferies, correct?
Yeah.
I'm gonna make sure I get that right. And we're gonna talk about AntiCancer, the mix of six, and we're with NorCal CarciNET community, and we're on Facebook and YouTube right now. Lorenzo, you and I go back. I think we first met in 2007. I think, or 8 at a Society for Integrative Oncology conference, correct?
Yeah, it was early on in the nascent years of our society, and we were thrilled to have you take on such an important leadership role as the patient advocate and more.
Yeah, those were interesting days back in the time. And if I, we're based out here in San Francisco, although our reach is pretty much across the nation, and maybe we have people in from around the world. We'll start seeing if people actually, the first person who gave us a greeting is from Australia, and so I'll just give you an idea. We already have greetings from Australia, so this is a worldwide conversation that we're having here. So maybe if you can give a little bit about your background first, and your work at MD Anderson, and for me also your work in yoga is pretty exciting as well. But so our viewers can get an idea of your background and how you came to write this really interesting book.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a bit about myself, and then Alison can share, and then kind of how we got to a husband and wife writing team. So I'm trained actually as a research psychologist. Got my PhD in a medical school in Bethesda, Maryland, with a focus in this area called medical psychology. So really trying to understand the importance of how psychological factors can influence, first and foremost, our physiology and biology. And importantly, also just the link between behavior and health overall. When I graduated, kind of had a choice to make at that point, which was being very interested in this field of psychoneuroimmunology, how psychological factors could influence our endocrine system and how that in turn influences the immune system and setting you up for either vulnerabilities or being able to control different diseases as they manifest in the body, the route of HIV/AIDS or cancer. At that time, there wasn't as clear of a link between the immune system and cardiovascular disease as we understand today. And so I chose cancer, and for the past 22 years have focused in the area of psycho-oncology, and then in particular integrative medicine, looking at not just complementary medicine treatments like behavioral interventions, meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, but also things like acupuncture, natural products, and then folding in all of these lifestyle factors that we'll start to talk about today. Being a behavioral psychologist and interested in particular in stress, early on, thought, we're going to document all the harms of stress. It's incumbent upon us to try and provide relief from stress. And I have a history in the area of yoga and meditation through my grandmother. And so started doing research in that area at MD Anderson, formal clinical trials of yoga. And, suffice it to say, actually, that over the past 20 years, yoga now is being integrated, and at least at a minimum, on the cancer care guidelines for managing a number of different symptoms. And we can talk about that today.
And I am a teacher by training, also have a master's in educational psychology, have worked in museums and education programs, worked in the classroom. And our story, a little bit about our story is Lorenzo and I are married, and we have 3 wonderful children. And we moved to Houston, and I was teaching in the classroom, and Lorenzo was working at MD Anderson, and he would come home every day talking about the super interesting work being done in integrative medicine and looking at cancer and lifestyle. And so he would come home and we would discuss it, and then we started to have children, and we realized that we had all these tools that we could incorporate in their life to give them every advantage to be healthy as they grew up. And so we started doing that, and then we realized we weren't living that life. And so then we started to make changes in our life based on the research and trial and error and what worked for us and what didn't work for us. And we started speaking to our friends and our community because we had this perspective that Lorenzo brought that was very unique, where he knew what was happening in the research. And I was a teacher, and so we started giving presentations in our community and then around the country and the world. And we decided to write a book that would be evidence-based, but with strategies that you could implement. And so we wrote the book, and on the day that we submitted our rough draft, Lorenzo was final draft. Sorry, yes, Lorenzo.
No more work.
Lorenzo was diagnosed with advanced cancer, which he'll talk about more in our presentation. And so suddenly we stepped to the other side, where we were patient and caregiver, and so learned a tremendous amount more, and have been sharing our story since.
And I know while while you went through your cancer diagnosis, we were, as you said, finishing or getting the final draft of the book, to which you did have a few pages in there on neuroendocrine tumors, on my story as well, which we're grateful for. One of the things that I hope we can bring up during this hour and a half as we go along is how the pandemic and how this has switched to, with all this virtual classrooms and virtual ways of connecting. For instance, we've been able to pivot and have actual virtual yoga classes with a yoga teacher who, Lorenzo, I introduced you to, Cheryl, who is now living across the other side of the country and is actually giving neuroendocrine tumor yoga classes once a week to our group here, which would have never happened before. And so it'd be interesting to get your take on how some of these things have changed. And why don't you start your PowerPoint, and once that's up, I'll turn it over to share your screen again. And you don't have to share your screen; it's already shared. Just start your PowerPoint and go for it. And as things come up, we'll work through them. So we can now see your PowerPoint. I'm going to put it up right now, and there you go. And it's your PowerPoint is up.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much. One of the things I was going to say as we started this is that you gave some great advice in our book, and that was that you get a diagnosis of cancer, and then it's about becoming the expert. And it takes a long time, and as you accrue knowledge, but how important it is to have time to learn about your own cancer and to learn about the options that are possible for you, and how important it is to kind of take time and to settle into that. And so, we become these experts when we're diagnosed with cancer. And the goal is to create a body that's as inhospitable to cancer as possible. And what we're going to present today are research about cancer and lifestyle. Lorenzo provides the science, and I talk about the how-to. And it's not that any one of these strategies that I may present are the way that you have to do it. It's more a jumping off spot. It's a place that makes you think, could I do that if I tweaked it in this way? Could that work for me? Or no, this doesn't work for us, and I'm going to try something else. So it's really just to get you thinking and looking at the way in which you're living to see whether or not there are areas that you'd like to make change in.
With that, I'll let you go forward.
So the news is not so rosy when it comes to looking at the statistics around cancer, and people, being in the field of cancer, I'm looking at statistics and incidence and death rates and these numbers all the time. Now the world as a whole is starting to understand the concept between statistics and death rates as we look at these figures every day. But these, compared to what we're experiencing around COVID-19 are quite, staggering numbers. Just for the United States, the estimate of 1.8 million new cancer cases for 2020, and over 500,000 deaths. And that's, approximately 150,000 new cases every month and 50,000 deaths. And what is most disturbing to me is that actually most of these cases and deaths and the suffering that's ensued is actually preventable. And this is data from the American Association for Cancer Research that kind of lays that out, and very broad strokes here, but about 30% of cancers are directly linked with tobacco, smoking, tobacco-related behavior. It's estimated that another 20% or so are linked with this area of energy balance. So that's, the combination of obesity, overweight, diet, and exercise, although other things do influence overweight and obesity, as we'll talk about. Then there's the virally mediated cancers, obviously not that relevant to NETs, but accounts for almost 100% of cervical cancers. And this, of course, is due to the HPV virus, which is essentially communicable through risky sexual behavior. And independent of changing behavior, most importantly, there's actually a vaccine for this. And we've all been desperately waiting for the coronavirus vaccine so we can go about our lives. If all women on the planet were to get appropriately vaccinated at the appropriate age with the HPV vaccine, we would essentially not have cervical cancer anymore. And this is the #1 cancer in India for women. So there is a preventable cancer vaccine. This is relevant for head and neck cancers as well. Then you see the occupational exposures, importantly alcohol. Alcohol is a carcinogen, I believe, importantly contraindicated for people with neuroendocrine tumors as well. Then ultraviolet light, and of course the sun, and this is a more often than not an early childhood risk factor. And in my situation, and the cancer I was diagnosed with was melanoma. And although I've been very safe once things were let's say under my control, it's really the sunburns under the age of 20, and I assume many of you are parents and grandparents, and it's estimated that 5 scorching sunburns under the age of 20, which I can guarantee you I had, because my summers I grew up in Italy, worked with my family of origin, as well as going to Greece. 5 scorching sunburns under the age of 20 increase your risk of melanoma by 80%. And that's why right now, and our colleague viewing us from Australia can attest to this as well, that there's an unprecedented increase in melanoma diagnoses, in particular in my age group, because of the sunburns that we had when we were in our teens and adolescence, that then set yourself up for those mutations to eventually grow and become a diagnosable cancer. And then you see some of the other factors there: environmental pollutants, endocrine, reproductive factors as it relates to some cancers in women. So it's suffice it to say, minimum of 50% of cancers could be prevented, and some estimate as high as 75%. And what's important to know is that, although A lot of people do believe that cancer is something that you inherit. The inheriting of a mutation that increases your risk of cancer is only relevant in about 5 to 10% of cancers. That doesn't mean, with that said, that we caused our cancers. In my case, it's likely an early childhood sunburn, but in many cases we actually just don't know. So there is the random luck thing. The key is, what do we do about things now?
So if you're looking to make change in your life, it doesn't matter if this is your first step, your 100th step, or your 1000th step. It all really matters. And after Lorenzo has gone over, how cancers are to some extent within our control, and a lot of extent not, it's really important to leave behind blame, shame, and guilt, because those things do not help us step forward in a positive way. And this is really about starting where you are right this very minute and stepping forward in a positive way that is only going to benefit you. So we talk about what we call the mix of 6, which are, and they are in a specific order as well: social support, stress, sleep, physical activity, diet, and exposure to environmental toxins. And often when we think of our health, we might think of a couple of different areas. We might think of diet, or we might think of exercise, but it's really important to see this bigger umbrella. And it also takes the pressure off of areas where you may be finding it challenging to address. So if you know that your sleep is okay, then you know that you're doing good things for your body and good things for your cells while you're working on, let's say, physical activity. So it's really, we are going to address them in their silo, but there's very much a relationship between them.
Something important to know is that, what we're going to talk about today, we're not going to go too deeply into the science, but when people come into our integrative medicine center at MD Anderson, they more often than not want to know what urban supplement to take. So, disclaimer right up front here, we're not going to tell you what urban supplement to take. Josh actually might know more about that, particularly as it relates to nets than we do. But we are going to guide patients in particular around those areas of the mix of 6. And a lot of people feel somewhat deflated, and they came in looking for the magic bullet for the cure, so to speak. And we told them to eat a Mediterranean diet, exercise more, manage their stress, and find love and support in their environment. And we're going to go into more of this in more detail. But what's really important to know is how important these factors are. And one of the reasons why we know they're so important is that they're all related, some more than others, and some to all of what we call the cancer hallmarks. So cancer, of course, is extremely complex, and we can't get into the details of all cancers. But Hahnemann and Weinberg, back in actually their first article was in 2000, and then they had an update in 2011 to try and understand as best as possible across all cancers what are factors that allow these mutating cells that are happening all the time in our body, either due to an exogenous reason like smoking, some type of carcinogen in the environment, or just things going wrong within a cell, and there's a mutation and that cell grows 2 cells. What allows that to grow and ultimately threaten our lives? And they came up with what they call the cancer hallmarks, biological processes where typically more than one of these needs to be active to allow a cancer to grow and thrive and be happy in the body. So, first and foremost, these 2 bullets, the cancer cells somehow avoid the signals that they should stop growing. Mutating cells have processes in place where they shouldn't be growing in our body, yet they somehow circumvent that. They resist cell death, something called apoptosis. Again, signals that are sent out that they should commit cell suicide, which is called apoptosis. They're able to just replicate without a change in what's called the telomeres that are on the end of every chromosome in our body. And it's as if these cells have no senescence, no aging process. They induce angiogenesis, meaning a fancy word for forming their own vascular system. They actually release substances that form a new blood supply within the tumor microenvironment to get them the energy they need to grow and thrive. They're able to evade the immune system, and that's done in two ways. One, releasing things that suppress aspects of the immune system, but then also tricking the immune system through what are called these checkpoint inhibitors, and this is the novel advent of immunotherapy. They're essentially releasing substance that put the brakes on the immune system, and they're not seen. They can break away from the primary tumor, and this is more relevant for solid tumors, and float around the body, find a new home, and start growing somewhere else, which of course is metastasis. A liver cancer cell is not supposed to grow on your spine. A prostate cancer cell is not supposed to be growing in your liver. They're supposed to stay in the organ of origin, and if they do break off, they're supposed to, again, undergo apoptosis or one of these other factors. And then last and most importantly, inflammation. They are releasing factors, and if our body is in a state of inflammation, that is something that the cancer cells really thrive under that kind of environment. I think it's important to share also at this point that we're not experts in NETs, and in fact, I think all of you, and I know for certain Josh, is the expert in neuroendocrine tumors. And one thing that I found challenging, and I didn't have to go very far to learn, that this is an extremely complicated cancer diagnosis, and in particular because there's no such thing as just a neuroendocrine tumor. It turns out that there, as you know, many different kinds, and the etiology and the controlling factors and the treatments are all different depending on the kind of neuroendocrine tumor that you may have. But suffice it to say that one or more of these cancer hallmarks and biological processes is for sure going to be playing a role.
And also to add to that, it's very important. We feel that, often, for the most part, most of us live in communities. We live with a partner or with children or with parents, friends or roommates. And it's important that when viewing what we talk about, that you think also how you can incorporate this into ways in which you meet with your community. This community support group is a fantastic tool, but it's also really important when you're living in your home environment that you think about how you can bring these things into the home and have your family or the people you live with participate as well. So synergy, which I alluded to earlier, the phenomenon where the whole is more than the sum of the parts. I think that we can all really relate to what negative synergy is. You sleep poorly, you wake up in the morning, you're supposed to exercise, you shrug it off, you eat a breakfast that's not healthy for you, you're not as kind and considerate to those you love and who are around you, and the list goes on. So it's really easy to create that negative synergy amongst the mix of six. But what we really want to do is we want to create a positive synergy and create that contagion amongst the different mix of six.
And what the data shows, and we'll get to this in each of the sections, is that the more of these factors you're able to engage in, the easier it is to engage in each of them. And at a biological level, we also see the synergy that happens between these. And then, of course, the opposite, which is the negative synergy. So I'm not going to get into details about obesity and overweight, because again, it's more relevant for some neuroendocrine tumors than others. But we do know that healthy weight is critically important. And for some people, maintaining enough weight is a challenge under cancer diagnosis and treatment. But we do know that overall, being overweight or obese is unhealthy for, as you can see listed here, at least a dozen different cancers. And again, it influences the cancer hallmarks. And what's important to know is, although we think of just diet and exercise as the key factors around maintaining a healthy weight, all of the mix of six, either directly or indirectly, influence overweight and obesity. Just as a quick example, restricted sleep deprivation, in particular sleeping 6.5 or less hours a night, modifies our metabolism so that when we eat the same meal that you would have otherwise eaten when you weren't sleep deprived, the food is metabolized in the body differently. There's a change in glucose insulin pathways. The food is processed and shunted over the excess energy, so to speak, from that food and stored as fat to a higher degree than an individual that same person who got a normal nights of sleep. Stress also, of course, modifies different processes that are going to influence overweight and obesity as well. So it's not as simple as, energy in, energy out. If I were just to eat more or less, then I'm going to shift my weight. All of the mix of six need to be considered.
So the first is social support. And the reason that we put this first was that this is the essential building block to success in all the other areas. We so often take on a new challenge, let's say diet or exercise. We want to do something in exercise, and we say tomorrow's the day we're going to, do the class, go to the gym, whatever it might be. I mean, with COVID, things are different, which we'll talk about a little later. But then the next day you're too tired or something comes up with friends and suddenly you've been sabotaged and you feel that guilt and all the rest of it. And what we think is really important is to back up and get a team in place to help you make the change that you're looking to make, so that you set yourself up for success, because it's hard enough, to build these habits which are essential to making changes in your life. But you don't do that unless you have that piece in place, that social support team.
So one aspect of social support that's a bit different than what Alison was saying, which is more the indirect effects of social support. How does social support allow you to be successful, and the flip side, not be successful if it's forms of negative support in the areas of mix of six? But there's also a direct effect, and we see an example of that here, essentially that loneliness is linked to all-cause mortality. And here in particular, it's aspects of emotional loneliness, increased all-cause mortality. These are large epidemiological studies, but the data is so compelling now that a lot of this research is actually done out of England, and the data is so compelling that the National Health Service, the NHS, which is their form of like our Medicare, Medicaid, socialized aspects of their medical system, they're now intervening and trying to find people who would be scoring high on this kind of loneliness scale, and intervening and providing them support, whether that's in the past, a person who would actually go to their home, and this is often with the elderly. And now, of course, very easy to connect with people on the phone and through video. And soon we'll actually have very strong data to show that taking people who would otherwise have been at high risk for death due to loneliness and seeing how that helps. And we know that, you know, independent of the harms of loneliness, that actually giving of yourself and volunteering is associated with beneficial effects. And here we see it in terms of reducing mortality. But there's clear data from, again, looking at the biological perspective, and in particular, looking at the systems within our body that control the cancer hallmarks and other biological processes, essentially gene expression and gene behavior, where we see people who have a higher meaning and purpose in life, engaged in giving of themselves outside of themselves, what would be called more engaging in high levels of eudaimonic well-being versus hedonic well-being. They have increased gene markers associated with increase in immune function, decrease in inflammation across a number of different factors. So it's not just you feel better because you're doing something good. There's actually data to suggest that it impacts you at a biological level.
I always like to say that if you feel good on the outside, that your cells are feeling good on the inside. And if you feel bad on the outside, then you know that potentially your cells are being affected. Social support, you know, what are the kinds of social support? So if you think of your own community and people around you, do you have that technical or informational support? Like, for instance, your physician, or listening to us talk or Josh talk. Practical support. Do you have somebody who can drive you to your clinic appointments, to drive your kids home from school? Do you have a person who listens to you, who shares your same values and who listens and can give constructive feedback? Do you have that participatory support? Somebody, a colleague from work, or somebody in your extended community who would attend a class with you? You know, now when we've got COVID, we're thinking that there are so many different opportunities that have actually revealed themselves. And as Josh was talking about with the yoga class, that you can be taking classes around the world. So there's so many different, the plus side is there's many different opportunities. Who is the motivational supporter? Who is the cheerleader who always believes in you and never gives up on you and is there for you? And then the emotional support. Who's the person who can listen to your deepest fears and celebrate your highest joys with you? And also to really remember that the caregiver needs to have their own support system, and that one person cannot do all of these things for you. So really looking at ways to expand your support system and those of your caregiver. And as Lorenzo was talking about, you know, social support just isn't about receiving all of this support. It's also about giving it. And that being said, there are some amazing online opportunities that you can participate in, even if, you know, you can't leave your desk, for instance, or your couch. There are ways that you can participate and support others online.
Mention Dorothy's unique story.
Yeah. One of an amazing woman, another person who was amazing, who we featured in our book, Dorothy, had a cancer diagnosis, and then her husband had received a cancer diagnosis, and her friends around her saw that she was struggling and realized that they needed to try and help her in any way they could. So one friend stepped up and gave her 3 sessions to see a therapist to try and provide that support that she knew she was needing. And she has been seeing that therapist ever since, for years and years. And so sometimes we don't know what to do for people, or we see people are needing additional support, and, you know, don't hesitate to take those steps to try and reach out and see if people are receptive to receiving that kind of support when you know they might need it.
So the next area is stress and stress management. And let's start with the stress part. So what you see pictured here is a pictorial representation of what was called the stress response. Some people will know of it more colloquially as the fight or flight response. This is from a British publication, so they use the term noradrenaline and adrenaline. In the US, we use the term norepinephrine and epinephrine, key stress hormones. So when we are experiencing stress in our lives, we have the release of these stress hormones, which evolutionarily speaking was very adaptive. If we're out on the savannah in the jungle and we are sensing that there's a predator in our midst, we need to mobilize. We need to mobilize our resources as quickly as possible to either fight or flee. And so the stress response is extremely hardwired, and it has, again, been with us for a long time. And I would make the argument that we have evolved from humans who had an exquisitely sensitive stress response. And what I've just been describing to you is really the acute stress response. However, the challenge is, and unfortunate for us, is that exact same acute stress response is what happens when stress becomes chronic, except that it is never ending and never stopping. The body constantly being bathed in these stress hormones, in particular damaging norepinephrine and cortisol. And we really know this primarily from really elegant animal studies where we can actually inflict stress on them, which of course is more challenging to do in humans, and the observational studies in humans showing that people who are not managing their stress well and have high levels of norepinephrine and cortisol and a dysregulation of cortisol functioning don't live as long after a cancer diagnosis. Less of an etiological factor and more of a factor that is super important to get under control after we have a cancer diagnosis. And you see pictured here chromosomes, which of course are inside every cell in our body, and on the caps are what are called the telomeres. These of course are relevant in the cancer hallmarks, but as we age, our telomeres get shorter, and this is part of the natural aging process. And when the telomeres get too short, we get what's called chromosomal instability. And this, of course, is one of the risk factors for cancer and why cancer is predominantly a disease of people of older age until more recently. Very elegant research by Elizabeth Blackburn, Nobel Prize winner, and her colleague Alyssa Epel at the University of California, San Francisco, were able to show that chronic stress actually leads to telomere attrition. And essentially what that means is that chronic stress is speeding the aging process. Suffice it to say that chronic stress and the biological processes that come from this exposure get into the tumor microenvironment and essentially make the body, allow the body to be more hospitable to cancer growth. Chronic stress activates all the cancer hallmarks and is associated, of course, with a number of different diseases where these cancer hallmarks are relevant. We know that inflammation, of course, is relevant for cardiovascular disease. Inflammation is relevant for Alzheimer's, as well as other forms of dementia. And diabetes, of course, is related to reprogramming of energy metabolism, etc. So what do we do about this? Well, it's quite simple, obviously, from what this doctor is sharing with the patient. Stress is killing you. You just need an easier job, a smaller house, and a different family. I know some of you are probably actually laughing who have families, and in particular the last 9 months, you're probably thinking it would have been nicer if the kids had been able to go to school every day, and the ones in college were off in college, and that big house, is harder to manage. Of course, this isn't a realistic prescription, but we all know that those aspects could help. But there are so many things that we can do to manage our stress. And you see some of those listed here, conventional in nature, but also things that we've learned from our colleagues in the East, things like yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong. Suffice it to say that most of, actually, in looking this over, if not all, of these interventions have not only been shown and use the word been proven to help aspects of mental health and buffering stress at a psychological level and improving quality of life, but also have an impact on biological processes. For example, a mindfulness-based stress reduction program was found to have an impact on telomere length. Those who did the 8-week program had longer telomeres compared to a control group at the 3 and 6 month follow-up time point. And importantly, these types of practices that, again, don't take that long, and a lot of the research has looked at what's called the MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, probably the most researched mind-body practice, and it's an 8-week program. And this landmark study actually showed that it had an impact on neuroanatomy. You see here an actual increase in the hippocampus. So similar to going to the gym to exercise your heart muscle with aerobic training, your muscles grow if you do resistance training. Same is true with this type of meditation intervention, that you can actually grow aspects of the brain. And in the same study, there was actually a shrinking of the amygdala, which is the fight or flight center, the negative emotional processing center of the brain. So this isn't just about feeling better, which we can guarantee you from these mind-body practices. It's about changing your biology and actual anatomy.
So what does this look like in your house, or what could this look like? We have 2 of our 3 children here sitting with 2 friends meditating. So while our children were growing up, we would meditate with them each morning before school at 7:20. We would listen to a guided meditation off the internet. They participated and chose the ones that they liked, and we would do anything from 2 to 11 minutes each morning. And so this is what it looks like. But the reality is that you spend a lot of time trying to get everybody on deck and teaching them this tool so that they will have it in their toolbox. And so Lorenzo and I participated. We all sat together in a circle each morning. But after Lorenzo's diagnosis and some time had passed, I realized that I didn't feel that I was grounded enough with the meditation practices that we had been doing, and that I needed something new. And so we did an MBSR course together. We did the 8-week course, and we did it together so that we would be able to come home and meditate together and to deepen our practice. So things change over time and with different situations, and just being able to adapt and recognize when you need to put a new tool into play. Another person who was featured in our book, Molly, who was diagnosed over 20 years ago now with a glioblastoma multiform, which is a very difficult brain cancer diagnosis. She received conventional treatment, and then 6 months out of her treatment, she realized that she was going to need something more. And so her cancer center offered a course, a meditation, mind-body practice course, which she signed up for. And the great thing now is that you can actually attend these courses online. Because of COVID, everything it's transformed. You lack that physical contact with people, but you're able to share over a computer screen and to learn a new practice. So she started incorporating these things in her life. So this is a place, we're up in an area called Georgian Bay in Canada, where we go and we see her every summer. And this is a very healing place for her. And so she has a very strong practice that she puts into her daily schedule each morning, where she envisions fish swimming out of the water into her body, eating up all the cancer cells and swimming back out, importantly, with the cancer. She does imagery where she has old important people in her family who have passed on, who come and give her healing energy. She does yoga. She has a strong faith practice. When she initially got diagnosed, she had her father put sticky notes all around her house with messages to try and reframe her negative thinking. So all of these things she has incorporated to try and maintain a very strong place in which that she can live well.
And when I was diagnosed, Molly sent me this long email. I've been there for Molly from the integrative medicine side, although, a lot of it was continuing to learn from her, because she was just this font of information about lifestyle, integrative medicine, and cancer. But she wrote this long email and essentially reminded me how important the mind-body component is. I, of course, should know this as a behavioral psychologist and having studied psychoneuroimmunology, but this for me was my weakest link, and Molly knew that. Diet, I was already primarily vegan, and high fiber, whole food, and exercise, not an issue. Sleep, perfect. Love and support is there in spades. But I wasn't doing, a regular mind-body practice. And she said that for her, that's the only reason she thinks she's alive. She, of course, does the full mix of 6, as is outlined in our book. But the mind-body practice is not something she would skip on any day. There was not a day that she would not prioritize this. So, and she's right. Again, from the data, we know that unmanaged chronic stress activates all the cancer hallmarks. So, why not do what we can to make our body as inhospitable to cancer as possible?
And I was going to say that, for many of us who have grown up in North America, mind-body practices are not necessarily what we were raised with. We may have a faith practice, but we don't have any of the other. And so this area in particular is one where you can't multitask. You have to dedicate time, but you can dedicate as little as 11 minutes each day to something. And even just taking 3 deep diaphragmatic breaths right now while you're sitting listening to us, you can feel your body just relax and sink into the chair, or if you're standing or laying down. So it's really the smallest of things over the course of the day. And like movement, you can be moving really fast or moving slowly. Mind-body practices are the same. So that 3 deep breaths, or, while you're washing your hands, really being very mindful and just feeling the soap and the water, taking your mind away from all the bigger issues that you might be coping with now. So this is the one where you get that team member, where you find somebody, whether your partner or a colleague or anybody who's expressed interest. Sometimes you just say, okay, I'm going to Google it right now. Where's a meditation course close that I can take part in? So there's so many out there. And if you have an interest, tap away on your computer and see what you can find.
And it may seem trite to say that, 3 deep diaphragmatic breaths, big deal, it's not going to do anything. It does. And the evidence is actually there that 1 or 2 minutes of deep diaphragmatic breathing has an impact on gene expression. Now, how long is that going to last? Not that long. But if you do, a 5-minute relaxing diaphragmatic breathing based meditation every day, then that's happening every day. And the reason why, from a mechanistic perspective, this is happening, and we can think of it more from a spiritual perspective if you want, but just pure physiology, as you drop the diaphragm, extend the belly out, which is the standard technique across all these different practices, belly breathing, you're stimulating the vagus, which is innervated through the lower gut. It goes up and into the brain. And when you stimulate the vagus, you're stimulating what's called parasympathetic tone, an increase in parasympathetic activation, which is the opposite of sympathetic nervous system activation. So you'll have a decrease in norepinephrine, a decrease in heart rate and blood pressure. And this is relatively rapid. And the more that you do it, the more rapid it'll end up being. And then, of course, you're changing neuroanatomy and all the rest of it. But we need to move on. We can come back to this if there's time when questions. So the area of sleep, we're not going to go that deep into sleep because it's probably not as clearly linked with multiple cancers, but we know it's clearly linked with multiple aspects of health. And you can line up essentially any chronic non-communicable disease, illness on sleep, and there's a clear correlation between sleep loss, sleep deprivation, and mortality for that particular disease, cancer included. So sleep is generally thought as the time when the body restores. Until recently, the pure biological purpose was somewhat unclear. But we know now the link again with multiple biological factors. People who don't sleep enough have a decrease in immune system functioning, particularly cell-mediated immunity, which helps to control cancer. There's an increase in inflammation, and so much so that sleep loss has been listed as a probable carcinogen, not as a known carcinogen like alcohol or asbestos or tobacco, but it's listed as probable. And interestingly, the one thing that we've learned most recently, first is the discovery of this system in the body called the glymphatic system. You're all, of course, familiar with the lymphatic system, our lymph nodes, where aspects of our immune system are housed and circulate out the white blood cells. There's what's called the glymphatic system, and this is a system that is essentially in our brain, and similar to the lymphatic system, it helps to clear away, when it comes to the brain, clear away built up refuse that happens throughout the course of a day, including amyloid plaques. What's important to know is the glymphatic system is only activated when we sleep. And there is now a clear association between sleep loss, sleep deprivation, and Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. So it's critically important for brain health to get a good night's sleep.
So here, I dreamed I got 8 hours of sleep, if only. So one of the ways we look at sleep, both routine and using the senses. If you think that you might have a sleep disorder, one sleep expert that we consulted with talked about having disrupted sleep 3 times a week for 3 months. And so if that is you, visiting a physician to have that evaluated and to get input would be a good idea. If you think that you might just have some bad sleep hygiene, think about it using your senses. But before that, one of the things is during the day, you can actually do quite a bit to impact how you sleep at night. So even as little exercise as 10 minutes can improve your sleep at night. If you are having disrupted sleep, napping really interferes with that. 20 to 30 minutes is ideal as long as that does not impact your sleep at night. And getting outside and having light exposure is very important as well to helping regulate your system. So thinking about vision, is your room too bright? Do you have LED lights from computers or television or the like that are impacting. When we travel, Lorenzo gets very disturbed by that, so we have duct tape that we put around the room, the hotel room, to help him sleep better. Smell, can you have a non-toxic spray that helps settle you before sleep? Hearing, are things too noisy? Do you need earplugs? Do you need a pillow over your head? I was going to say also with vision, the eye covers are really amazing. Lorenzo uses one, and they've become such a long way that your eye isn't impacted by the covering, and it's pitch black. Taste, one of the things to be careful of, alcohol and coffee, chocolate, all of those things interrupt. And like many of us know, that alcohol, if you drink too much, your sleep is disturbed later in the evening, because alcohol causes arousal in the system through the metabolism of alcohol later, 3 and 4 in the morning. Also, what's the temperature in your room? We live in Houston, and you can have the heating on in the morning and the air conditioning on at night. So you really want to make sure that you've got the right, that your bedroom is cool enough for you to sleep. So all of these things are, while they may seem like things you've heard a lot of, if you actually look at your sleep and it is disturbed, by just tweaking a few of these things, it can really impact the way in which you sleep.
And a wonderful resource besides that book, of course, is National Sleep Foundation, a great website to visit.
And important to look at the guide for how much sleep children and teenagers need. And surprisingly, teenagers need, between, I think it's 8.5 and 9.25 hours sleep per night. And so it's really beneficial to look and to see, if you have a teenager in the house, how much sleep are they getting?
So the area of exercise, we don't have to actually dwell too much on this, because it's clear now that exercise is a key factor for reducing the risk of many different cancers, and exercise is linked with better outcomes, again, from multiple cancers. And it's almost a linear fashion, but it's not totally more is better. The sort of a return on the investment, which seems to be around 150 to 300 hours a week, which equates to around 30 to 60 minutes ideally a day. And you see here a number of different cancers. What has been sort of added to the equation is sedentary behavior. So here's some data from a large cohort study that tracked people over time, looked at risk of death due to cardiovascular disease in lighter orange, and due to cancer in darker orange there. And we see that as sedentary behavior goes up, death due to these two diseases goes up as well. And importantly, this is controlling for how active somebody is during the day. So yes, people who exercise for an hour a day do better than those who don't exercise at all, but those who exercise an hour a day and sit less do better than people who exercise an hour a day and sit for the majority of their day. Similar to stress, sedentary behavior and lack of exercise activates all the cancer hallmarks. And the flip side, people who are more active tend to have better immune function. They have lower inflammation. There's less angiogenesis, etc. Not the least of which is, you see pictured here in gray, all of the benefits from both aerobic activity as well as resistance training, ideally combined on aspects of quality of life, mental health, physical well-being, etc. And you see there listed on the right the newest American Cancer Society guidelines. And what's new here isn't that exercise is important. What's new here is, unfortunately for all of us, they've upped the dose somewhat. And they've added that caveat that getting 300 minutes or even more will give you the most health benefits. So it's about getting out there and just being active.
So do you have to run a marathon each day? No. It's really about working with where you are right now. And one of the ways in which sometimes it's important to kind of evaluate where you are. And what I find personally is that if I wear a Fitbit here and there, and after a while I realize, you know what, I think I'm not moving enough. And so I just put it back on, and I'm able to see how many steps I'm taking, how active I'm being. And that allows me to gauge what I need to be doing and putting into my routine. So it's really, routine is really critical, like it is in sleep. So keep a log and see how many steps you're taking. Your cell phone will track that with you so that you can see how many steps you're taking on a given day. And it's really not about, we talk about, or Lorenzo talked about, aerobic and strength training. And so even a brisk walk is fantastic exercise. And given everything that's happening with COVID, you know, the gyms are closed, or you don't want to go to the gyms. Let's say you don't have an exercise machine at home. We're walking. And we've established a new routine. Everybody is kind of being thrown out of their routine. But if you're able to get outside and walk, and if you're in treatment and you can walk to the street and back, that's a fantastic, great place to start. It's not how far that you have to go or that you have to accomplish great things. It's really just trying to improve your activity level across the day. So we're standing. We decided to stand for our presentation today because it's a great opportunity for us to stand versus sitting. You know, breaking up your day. If you have a pet, it's fantastic, because our dog is so exhausted, it doesn't want to go on any more walks and just lays down on the road.
For the first month, I was thrilled. And then it's like, okay, I'm done. You guys can, you know, get back to work. Let me just sleep most of the day.
We barely get out of the driveway and it's on its back. So, you know, breaking up your day with these, you know, quick walk around the block just to get the blood moving.
And there, the data is very clear that there isn't a benefit of doing it all at one time. Now, it depends on what your goals are. We're not talking about elite athlete training or necessarily exercise for weight loss, changing your metabolism. Just in terms of overall health and well-being, 3, you know, 10-minute bursts of exercise is similar to doing 30 minutes all at one time.
And you can, you know, online, there are so many different free exercise options, and you can do, you know, the 7-minute workout where you just use a chair and your body weight. Peloton, we don't have a Peloton, but I investigated their 30-day free trial where you can have exercises to target all areas of your body for strength training and cardio. So there's many different great opportunities out there where they're taking care. So developing that fitness routine, trying to keep to it. Normally what we do is try and incorporate physical activities into social events. So for instance, the kids and Lorenzo every Sunday morning would play soccer with a whole group of other friends. And so that was an activity that we did. We looked for ways to, instead of celebrate with food, to celebrate with activity. And now we'll meet friends and maybe we'll walk occasionally. But certainly we're walking during this time. So Lorenzo normally was, you know, when things are normal and he's in his office, he's on the 12th floor and he always walks up and down the stairs. So how can you put exercise into your life without doing it the traditional way, like going to the gym? So walk up and down the stairs, walking meetings. That is a fantastic way. You know, put your earplugs in and you can do that. Lorenzo's walked around the neighborhood this whole time for months and months.
You know, even not even walking briskly, depending on who you're with, and if you have to take notes, you get close to 5,000 steps in one hour meeting. So if you have 3 meetings, you know, you want to stand for other portions of the day, but you've already done all the aerobic activity you need.
So Lorenzo at work has a standing desk. He requested a treadmill desk and they said no. So we bought a very inexpensive recumbent bike on Amazon, and he can store it under his desk when he's not working.
Now that recumbent bike is in the living room. And so when I'm watching television, on conference calls, even just, you know, working with my laptop in my hand on my phone, I'm on the bike.
for your kids or for yourself, an ironing board is a fantastic stand-up desk, and you can spread out. We are talking, our computer is on one of these super inexpensive computer stands, and we sent our 2 sons to college with these stands so that they could also stand. So there's lots of different ways. Obviously, a cardboard box works too.
So we're nearing the end, we promise, but hopefully everyone is still engaged. The area of diet is really complicated, and we're not going to get into too much detail in keeping it as the general dietary pattern, because we know that for many of you, a lot of the basic recommendations of eating a whole food plant-centered diet are challenging. So, of course, always consult with a dietitian, a professional nutritional counselor, as it will relate to some of your limitations. But again, back to the cancer hallmarks, we know that what we eat is going to influence all of the cancer hallmarks, and it could either set things up for inflammation and immune suppression and increasing in oxidative stress and creating gut dysbiosis, which I'll describe what that means. Or, of course, the flip side is following a plant-centered diet is going to improve outcomes.
So I'm trying to eat more vegetarians. A little humor for you here. You have to look at your own dietary needs and see, what you can do within your particular cancer. But for those around you who potentially don't have those limitations, one of the ways in which we structure a plate is we think of what are the vegetables that we can put on to cover a half of the plate and then build the other half, looking for ways in which we can incorporate more vegetables into our diet, more healthy fruits like the antioxidant fruits, the berries and the stone fruits, looking at grains, whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts, seeds, and the clean proteins, whether they're meat or tofu or other ones like the lentils. So really looking at, can you build your plate with the vegetables first? And what vegetables can you eat? And can you put those on your plate? What we've realized, if you look at the recommendations, is that it's not really possible to get a lot of vegetables if you don't start at breakfast. And so we serve with breakfast at least one vegetable to our kids. All growing up, they'd come around the corner and they would have, let's say a typical breakfast, like let's say an egg, but then they would have coleslaw on the side or asparagus or whatever our vegetables had been the night before. So you really want to think of how can you incorporate those things into each meal of the day.
And an important area, as I mentioned with the hallmark slide, is this aspect of dysbiosis. So that's essentially talking about the microbiome. And if you haven't heard about the microbiome, which I'm guessing you have, you should go and learn more about it. But suffice it to say, we are either outnumbered or equally numbered with non-human cells in our body. And this is what's called the microbiota and what makes up the microbiome. And this can either increase aspects, again, activating some of the cancer hallmarks, or allow us to maintain health and well-being. And the microbiome has now been linked with not only a number of different cancers, but a number of different chronic illness conditions. And essentially, it's extremely complicated because there's hundreds of microbes that are good for you, and then on the flip side that can be harmful to us. We have co-evolved with these over millennia, and it's important to try and increase the numbers of the healthy ones and to decrease the unhealthy ones. The best way to intervene in this area for now, as we learn more, is not really with a herb or a supplement, or even necessarily a highly processed probiotic food that you've heard about. And you can read about this in an op-ed that I wrote for the Wall Street Journal with a summary essentially there. And what we're trying to look for here with the microbiome is to create as much diversity as possible. So we know that lactobacillus, which of course you can get from yogurt, and other probiotic foods, which essentially are fermented foods, that these foods, probiotic-rich foods, as well as supplements, tend to have a very limited variety of species. So you'll see on the bottle there's 50 billion whatever, but when you look at the ingredients, there's very few species. So again, lactobacillus and 4 or 5 other bifidobacterium and 4 or 5 other bifidos. So they may say they have 15 species in there, but there's literally over 100 healthy ones that we need to foster in our body. So again, the pill is going to create dysbiosis, and we've shown that patients who take a probiotic supplement have lower microbiome biodiversity and, importantly, lower response to immunotherapy and other types of cancer treatments. And eating excess probiotic foods could perhaps create that same dysbiosis, decreasing the variety. The key is the prebiotic soluble fibers, putting food in there that the healthy bacteria grow and thrive on. And we know from what's going on with, depending on dietary limitations of people with neuroendocrine tumors, you may or may not be able to eat some of the foods listed here. But it's important to try and get some of these prebiotic foods in your diet to be able to enrich that environment.
So again, I'm sure that if you're working with a dietitian, you already know about this, but if keeping a food diary, even for a couple of days, will really show you where you might have holes that you need to fill. We look at our diet in a 90-10 model. 90% is health sustaining, 10% is neutral or health depleting. And so when you think about each meal or you think about the day, how are you doing and what can you do to improve things? Often we think also it's about bringing new things in. It's not that you can't eat all of the things over here. It's just the more that you bring in that's good, the more the stuff that isn't so good gets pushed off. So it's really about introducing new things that you can, that are going to work for you. Reading labels. Things are filled with sugar, from tomato sauce to pesto, across the board. And just looking for things that are really low, kombucha, for instance. I go and I look at the bottles, and the amount of sugar range is so great. So I only choose the ones that have the lowest sugar, no matter which ones those are. So making sure you do. And also calories and quantities. A calorie is not a calorie. 50 calories of chocolate chip cookie is not the same as 50 calories of broccoli. And there's lots of online tools that you can use to help you. We go to a farmer's market, when we have the the young men in our son's home, and buy food and cook for the week. I just wanted to show you because there's such a tidal wave of awful food out there that you really have to push back hard to make choices. And so I decided for our daughter's birthday that we went to a bowling alley, and that I wasn't going to serve pizza and junk food all through the event. So we bowled, and I put all of these foods like a hummus and a bean dip and a seaweed and edamame, and I put it on the table with water. And we sat there for 45 minutes. And, after 10 minutes, I could feel people were restless because, half the group didn't want to eat it. But by the time that we had got to 45 minutes, the kids were so happy. They were all eating something on the table. And it just shows you, if you wait people out, they will start eating, because those were the only choices. And there was something for everyone. And then we had the cake. So you don't have to go all in.
So one of the areas where there's been a lot of misinformation about diet, and if you talk to your oncologist and you ask them about the role of diet, they may say it's not that important. And And that's partly because there hasn't been a lot of research on looking at synergy, as we started out talking about. And this is was a very expensive, important study that was done in breast cancer patients, and they essentially tried to increase fruit and vegetable consumption. And they didn't see a huge effect. It was a modest effect, but based on what everyone was hoping for, it was somewhat of a failure. And what's interesting, this retrospective study of all the women in the studies, they looked at those who increased fruit and vegetable consumption alone, those who increased exercise alone, or didn't change either one of those behaviors. And the survival curves pictured here, they're all the same. So if you change one or none, it actually had very little effect. It's the ones that you see pictured out here all by themselves. They increased fruit and vegetable consumption, and their exercise habits had much better survival. And similarly here, this is a very controlled experimental study looking at the relationship between depression, daily stressors, and inflammation to either a healthy meal, your inflammatory response, or to an unhealthy meal. And just the kind of takeaway here is that this one inflammatory marker, C-reactive protein, in general measure of inflammation, those who had stress in their life, it didn't matter which meal they ate, their body responded in a high stress manner. So yes, eat that healthy food, but if you're not managing your stress, that food's not going to be doing as much as it could for you. And lastly, this was a study that actually measured telomere length over the course of a full year, replicating that women in this study, I think it was 200 women who had more stress across the course of the year, had shorter telomeres, but that exercise, healthy diet, and healthy sleep buffered telomere shortening. So these women represented in this top line here, this is change in telomere, had no change in telomere across any level of stress that they were experiencing. Even 6 stressors across that year didn't lead to shorter telomeres, where their counterparts who had low exercise, poor diet, and poor sleep had much shorter telomeres by the end of the year. So the last area, and we're going to go quickly, here are the environmental exposures. Extremely complicated research to do and to try and examine. Suffices to say they fall into 2 categories you see pictured here, things that we know actually cause DNA damage and set up that carcinogenic process, cancer growth. And then probably more challenging to study are the endocrine disruptors, these substances that we're coming in contact with every day throughout our day, typically in the dozens to, in some cases, hundreds of these different chemicals in the foods we eat, in the beauty care products that we use, and they modify how our hormonal system functions, and over decades can lead to an increased risk in a number of different cancers.
We know that there are around 85,000 chemicals out there, and only between 8 and 9% have actually been tested. And so that puts us in a very difficult position as the consumer. So we adopt what we call the precautionary principle, where you don't use a product unless you know that it has been tested and deemed safe. It's really challenging, but you can control what goes on in your own home, and from the top of your head to the tip of your toes. So all the different products that we use, that teenagers and the kids use, we can slowly trade them out for things that we know are safe. The Environmental Working Group, EWG.org, is a fantastic resource that tells you about different products and their levels of toxicity. There are apps like Think Dirty, Shop Clean, where you can have the barcode read and it will tell you what the properties are and how toxic they feel they are. And the real issue with with all of this is that you want your cells to be working in the best possible way. And so the more chemicals that are in your system, the less likely that is to be happening. So it's really about trying to keep your body as clean as you can with the products around you. So in your car, dry cleaning, just really being conscious of what you are coming into contact that you can control, because we know that there's a lot you can't. So it's really, gathering that group of people around you who can be part of your team and that can help you make the change you want, finding a mind-body practice that you're willing to commit to for 10 minutes a day, sleeping well, keeping moving during this time, food, that 90-10 balance, and watching your environmental exposures. So it's really synergy. And I'm going to read just a short quote that Josh so graciously shared with us when we were writing our book and telling his story, his inspirational story. And he says, "I am by no means a perfect example of the AntiCancer Living lifestyle guide, Josh told me, but I do focus on recentering myself, and I focus on how I want to feel in the long run. It's about balancing my life despite the disease. It's there, but it's not running the show. I'm certainly not fighting it. Instead, I'm successfully living with it." Thank you, Josh. So it's a practice. And the more you practice, the better you get.
So we hope that this has been helpful to you, and we encourage you to start AntiCancer Living today and think about your next step. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. You can take down your PowerPoint. We're back online, and there's been a lot of comments throughout the conversation that you've had, and looking back at this, I'll bring up some of the quotes there that maybe you can address from Lorenzo, your practice at MD Anderson. Just thinking about, and I'll put one on the bottom of the screen. I mean, a lot of this is, how do you express, you talked about social emotional support. We live with a disease that is more chronic than most cancers. You'll live with it for a long time and undergo the symptoms. How do you work with your family and friends who may look at someone who has a disease for 10 years and get that type of support with them, given how long we live with this disease? And how would you work with a patient in that kind of scenario?
It's true. This is it is more challenging, and I think we're all thrilled in the cancer world to be able to say that cancer becoming a chronic disease is becoming more the norm, which of course is great news, but it's historically not been that way. So people, like even in my situation, and even with our colleague David Servan-Schreiber, who wrote what we kind of view as the prequel to this book, and a lot of the women profiled in our book were part of a study that David and I designed together to look at lifestyle. Is that a lot of people don't know this who don't have cancer, but everyone has cancer in their body. And we need to not necessarily act like active cancer patients, but we need to do everything to make our bodies inhospitable to that mutated cell in growing. And I think when we think about cardiovascular disease and other diabetes, these are diseases that are kind of have always been viewed as chronic in our society. And, somebody after their first heart attack is being very careful about the foods they eat and exercise, and everyone in their community supports them in that way. But when it comes to cancer, even when the cancer is removed and the patient may have no evidence of disease, our communities essentially want us to get back to normal, want us to get back to the normal, even though, and then people are using this term, the new normal, and we're using this term, the new normal, around COVID-19. And this should not be, it's just the new. And I think communicating that I think is important to the community around you, because you don't want to isolate yourself, and you don't want people to feel bad. And Alison can address how to deal with this more from the social perspective. But even using the example like heart disease, that, you know, yes, my cancer is controlled, or I'm told I have no evidence of disease, but I'm vulnerable and I still need to keep my body, you know, inhospitable to potential cancer growth, like somebody after their first heart attack may be vulnerable for future heart issues.
I think that it's very challenging because you need to keep people updated that your life hasn't changed. You know, that you're still grappling with the same things or with slightly different things in your cancer diagnosis. And, you know, I think that maybe, I'm just thinking of different ways in which one could do that. But writing a letter and telling people how things are going and what you're willing to share and what life is like, you know, if I come to your house for dinner, or you're proposing something that we're going to do together, that you know that these are my limitations, but I work around them so that I can be part of communities. I think that, you know, the more that people know about the situation, the easier it is to say, okay, you come over and we're going to do this for you and that for this person. And it makes it just part of every day, that really it's about communicating with the people around you. It's also about being part of a support group. You know, there's a group of people here at MD Anderson who've been part of a very small support group for 20 years. And that group also gives you the strength and ideas about how to reach out to your extended community.
So this is a pretty long quote, but I just wanted, it really summed up the afternoon so well, and with a thank you for doing this right at the end, which I thought was a great way to. This is our friend from Australia who's written to us, and just the whole part about validation of being important. And, you know, here's someone who's incorporating many of the things of the mix of six, and there's a lot of other things in our chat about just thank you for doing this, and thank you for writing the book. We have many people actually who have downloaded the book while we were in the middle of the conversation. So Lorenzo and Alison, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And I know that when we're all sitting in our little cubes here, that with our families, that it's hard to get 90 minutes of quiet time to do this. So again, I thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again in one of these meetings where we can be together instead of in our little cube here.
Well, thank you. And even though, you know, we can't see you all out there, we can feel your energy, and we're sending our energy for positive, you know, living. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
And thanks for hosting, Josh.
Yeah.
And I hope we get together soon at the SAO.
Yes, look forward to it. And with that, we will close the broadcast. Good afternoon to everyone.